Thank you, Ewald. Dear Excellencies, representatives of the media, dear guests, good morning to everyone in this room and those who are following us online. Thank you all for attending the presentation of the preliminary statement by the European Union Election Observation Mission to Iraq. The EU has deployed for the first time ever an election observation mission to Iraq upon invitation by the Independent High Electoral Commission of Iraq. Allow me to start with a summary of our main findings. The EU Election Observation Mission assesses that the early 2021 parliamentary elections were technically well managed, they were competitive, and a largely calm campaign enabled voters to make an informed choice. In response to demands of the mass Tishreen protest, these elections were held under a new electoral system. The legislation imposed, however, some restrictions on electoral rights. Unregulated campaign spending has limited the level playing field. Freedom of media and freedom of expression were not safeguarded during the campaign. The Independent High Electoral Commission recorded a low turnout. Although our mission observes since the end of August and assesses the entire electoral process, regarding the election day, allow me to share our findings first. The EU Elections Observation Mission observed the general election day last Sunday with over 100 observers. This includes the core team of 12 experts and election analysts, 20 long-term observers, plus a delegation of the European Union, as well as 59 diplomats from EU member states, Canada, Norway, and myself. Here, I would like to use the opportunity to thank the diplomats for their valuable support of our joint observation activities. EU observers have assessed that voting on election days was largely peaceful, calm, and orderly. And I commend Iraq and its people for this conduct. Voters were able to freely express their will. Party agent and domestic citizens observers were present in the vast majority of polling stations, and voting procedures were largely followed. The overall conduct of the voting was rated positively in 95% of the polling stations visited by our observers. However, the secrecy of the vote was not always ensured, and fingerprint verification procedures were not implemented consistently, resulting in some voters being disenfranchised. For example, EU observers reported multiple times about different implementation of the so-called 5% rule that states that 5% of voters are permitted to vote without full verification of the fingerprints. This includes both the biometric card as well as the electronic cards. Some polling stations implemented this in the morning, others in the afternoon, and some did not at all. Observers across the country noted a low turnout, which is in line with the officially announced turnout of 41%. It is not up to me to speculate about the reasons for this low turnout. The absence of voters is nevertheless a clear message to the political elite. Although even in some EU member states the turnout is low, in these early parliamentary elections, the low participation is much more significant. This was supposed to be a fresh start, an opportunity to change the political landscape for a different future of this country. A majority that apparently, and also to me unfortunately, did not believe in this opportunity. For the overall electoral process up to today, our mission concludes that the Constitution guarantees fundamental rights and freedoms necessary for holding credible elections. However, electoral legislation imposes some restrictions on electoral rights. These restrictions run contrary to international commitments, such as legal capacity for the right to vote. The same is true for age, education, debathification requirements on candidatures. Let me emphasize, none of these international standards are imposed by the European Union or us, the Election Observation Mission. These commitments are vested in international commitments which Iraq has subscribed. Furthermore, the legal framework contains several gaps and imprecisions, with many aspects of the electoral process left unregulated. This compromised legal certainty. In the absence of reliable population data, it is not possible to ascertain whether the equality of the vote is ensured by the current delimitation of constituencies. In total, 3,249 candidates, including 951 women, that equals 29.3%, contested 329 seats. And there were, in general, competitive contests held in each constituency. Grounds for disqualification of candidates between registration and election day were poorly defined in the IHEC regulation, to the point of undermining the principle of legality. Campaigning mainly promoted the candidates on blocks that already dominated the previous elections, while most recently established Tishri protest parties boycotted the elections. Fundamental freedoms of expression, assembly, association, and movement were generally respected during the campaign. This enabled voters to make an informed choice. Violent election-related incidents were rare. However, according to many interlocutors, the potential of party-affiliated non-state armed actors to intimidate both the electorate and the candidates may have had an effect on voters' choice and turnout. Our observers noted that particularly female candidates were subject to this intimidation and threats. It is not acceptable in any society that a female candidate is advised to hide after announcement of results, because otherwise her life would be in danger. The amount a political party or candidate can spend on campaigning is not regulated. This had a negative effect on the level playing field for contestants and the competitiveness of the elections. In other words, political money has talked, and particularly independent candidates were often silenced due to the lack of funds. Interlocutors reported that despite explicitly prohibition, many holders of public office used public funds for campaigning. Technical preparations of the elections were conducted efficiently. The overall performance of the IHEC at national and government level was assessed positively, with timely implementation of operational plans. Commendably, an independent audit company assessed the integrity of the electronic counting and results management technology. However, the results of the audit were not published, and stakeholders' trust in the whole IT system remains low. Stakeholders' perception of the independent Higher Electoral Commission's independence varied noticeably. Transparency in the work of the IHEC was limited, despite some recent improvements. Important information in Arabic only was available on the IHEC website. The systematic publication of the full text of the independent High Electoral Commission decisions, regulations, and instructions in both Arabic and Kurdish language was lacking. Furthermore, public outrage, especially engagement with stakeholders, was found inadequate, and nearly all stakeholders pointed to the lack of a robust voters' education program. The final voter register contained some 25 million eligible voters, with 17.2 million Iraqis biometrically registered. In addition, some 5 million voters could vote using the old, non-biometric electronic voter cards. Since not all biometric voter cards issued were distributed before election day, only some 20 million voters were in possession of a valid voter card required for voting. In the absence of reliable population data, it is not possible to assess the accuracy of the voter registration data. The public media decided not to provide any coverage of candidates and political parties in the news programs, covering the campaign instead in specific election programs. This restricted citizens' right to have access to a pluralistic campaign coverage. The campaign on the main private TV channels was generally perceived as lively but partisan. Freedom of the media was not safeguarded during the campaign, following death threats to journalists and temporary closures of some television channels. In the Kurdistan region of Iraq, the case of 3 journalists recently sentenced to 6-year jail terms negatively impacted the campaign. Freedom of expression online is curtailed by numerous clauses of the Penal Code and vague criminal provisions, such as the ones included in the Kurdistan region's law to prevent misuse of communications equipment. Interlocutors across the board reported rampant disinformation and manipulative interference online that disrupt the integrity of the online space. Third-party campaigned on social media, including with paid political advertisements. Repeated threats, insults, and attacks online hindered the inclusiveness of the political debate. The implementation of the constitutional requirement for at least 25% women representation in the Council of Representatives is hampered by the lack of clarity in the relevant legal provisions. Moreover, relevant provisions have been interpreted to implementation of the quota as a maximum rather than a minimum. The electoral legislation is silent on ways to ensure the exercise of political rights by persons with disabilities. This falls also short of international commitments which Iraq has signed up to. The IAC failed to demonstrate a proactive approach by following up on proposals that would enable persons with disability to cast their vote in a way that would respect the secrecy of their vote. The law guarantees 9 reserved seats for some national minorities, but its implementation fails to fully achieve the meaningful political representation. Internally displaced person numbers decrease considerably, but their participation remains a challenge, as only a minority of them is registered in camps and could therefore benefit from the special voting provisions. While the IHAC has announced the results within 24 hours, as it is written in the law, the EU observers are still on the ground to observe also post-electoral developments, including complaints and appeals. It is critical in any electoral process that grievances are addressed through the respective legal mechanism. Iraq held a very peaceful election day, and I commend the people of Iraq again for this conduct. There should be also no space for violence in the post-electoral period. Candidates and also voters must be safe now and in the future. I will return in about 2 months' time to present the final report of this EU election observation mission with a comprehensive analysis of the entire electoral process. This final report will also include a set of recommendations on how to improve future electoral processes. These recommendations will be presented to the newly elected members of the Parliament, the new government, and to all other stakeholders in Iraq who are related to the electoral process. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, and I pass the floor to Dominic Ruiz de Reza, the head of the delegation of the European Parliament.
Good morning, dear Chief Observer, OCAM, national authorities, ambassadors of the European Union, ambassadors of EU member states, members of the European Parliament, journalists, citizens, and friends. I am the chair of the delegation of the European Parliament that has had the honor to observe the legislative elections of Iraq. It is a great pleasure to speak to you today on behalf of all 7 members of this delegation that have endorsed this declaration. We are indeed the only parliamentary election observation delegation present in the country, from 7 countries representing 5 different political groups of the European Parliament. I take the opportunity to thank my colleagues for the work and cooperation. Mr. Oleni, Mr. Thomas, Mr. Andrews, Mrs. Neumann, Mr. Camponenossi, and Mr. Gianni Joseph. I also take the opportunity to thank our dedicated staff, Madame Castagnoli, Mr. Mendoza, and Madame Pachinelli. The European Parliament represents 450 million European citizens. We are committed to help strengthen democracy all over the world. During the past 70 years, democracy has provided to Europeans the peace, stability, and prosperity, and we believe it can do the same for Iraq. We have observed these legislative elections integrated in the election observation mission of the European Union, and I take the opportunity to deeply thank our and my esteemed colleague, Viola von Kramon Taubal, Chief Observer of the Commission, for her work and cooperation. Indeed, we fully endorse the preliminary findings and conclusions of the mission that she leads and that she has just presented to all of us. During our stay in Iraq, we met with several representatives of political parties participating in these elections, with diplomatic missions, with activists, and with civil society organizations. We also met with the Independent High Electoral Commission. On election day, we also had the opportunity to observe voting in several polling stations in Baghdad, Karbala, and Hira. We commend the men and women that went to vote on that important day, and the work of the electoral authorities, the polling station workers, and indeed as well, the security forces that made possible a peaceful election day and the general electoral process. These elections have had the lowest turnout in the recent history of Iraq. Many interlocutors pointed out at a possible high abstention which has finally and regrettably materialized. They underline we commend the authorities as well for requesting an audit of the previous voting system. This is important to build confidence, but this audit should be public. Transparency is also a key issue when it comes to campaign finance, as has been already highlighted. This has been referred to us by many of our interlocutors and rightly so. Citizens have a right to know how much our parties and candidates are spending, as well as the origin of these resources. Under the current legal framework, campaign finance is unlimited. This results in an uneven playing field among candidates. On the need for more inclusive election, there are 3 areas we would like to mention. First, women need to be able to participate more in politics. We welcome the existence of a 25% quota for women in parliament, but this is a minimum and not a ceiling, as has been interpreted regrettably by some political parties. Moreover, politicians must be free from violence and intimidation, and free from rumors fabricated to destroy their reputations and their families, a tactic of intimidation that has, very unfortunately, specifically targeted women. Second, violence, or the mere threat of it, cannot be a tool for political gains in any democracy. Armed, non-state actors should not be a part of the democratic life of Iraq, in line with the letter and spirit of the Iraqi constitution. Iraqi society needs to move away from a highly militarized society and move towards a well-organized state, nourished by a vibrant citizenship. Also, in a context of related violence, social media platforms must not allow for hate speech or fake news dissemination. Their cooperation, meaning the cooperation of social media platforms with EA and the Communication and Media Commission, should be extended. Third and last, but not least important, the representatives of minorities who have met have expressed their concern over the representation. The seats they have available by law must be effectively occupied by members of parliament that effectively represent these minorities. The new parliament will have an opportunity to engage in an open dialogue with these minorities to improve the current system. Dear friends, allow me to conclude with a brief remark. Today, we want to commend as well the professional work that UNAMI carries out in the country. Also, because it's led by our former colleague of the European Parliament, Janine Hennis-Plasschaert. UNAMI's work is fundamental for Iraq, for the advancement of its democracy, and for its citizens. From our part, the European Parliament, through our delegations for relations with Iraq, of which I happen to be the vice chair, will continue to cooperate with Iraq and its citizens. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, and we take now questions. Please introduce yourself by name and mention the media outlet you work for. We start with the gentleman here on our side.
Thank you very much.
English.
My name is Nino Duchan. I'm with a French news agency, AFP. I have a question for Mrs. Buchanan. As you can have seen, certain parties have strongly criticized the vote, the elections, saying, and I quote, the vote was a scam. I would like to have your reaction to that, please.
Thank you for these questions. Well, I mean that the results might be contested. That's not too new for this country, I guess. But what we have seen, what we have observed technically was calm and orderly. There was nothing on the technical level in a majority of the polling station, of the polling centers we have been observed during the elections day, on both days, special voting day as well as the general voting day. What might confirm this assessment of the party representatives. From our point of view, it was orderly and well managed. It was technically absolutely okay, and there is no reason for this kind of accusation. But of course, the recounting goes on. As you know, there are 3,181 polling stations now currently being recounted here in Baghdad. We have our observers on the spot. They are observing this. And you also know that from yesterday on, after the announcement of the results from IHEC, they have 3 days of period where they can appeal and submit complaints. which is also a normal legal mechanism, and everyone who has doubts might submit complaints in a legal manner. This would be my answer to this.
Next question. The gentleman in black, please.
No, sorry. Yeah. Is it English here? Sorry, guys, this is not English. This is not English. This is. Could you please?
It was preset for the English channel.
No, it's not preset. Why is it so difficult to make this? Sorry for this. It was either Arabic or Kurdish in my. Okay, please go ahead. No, it's not. It's not. Sorry, what is the...
No.
No, it's English. So...
He has to repeat the question.
Yeah, why are you satisfied? Yeah, we are satisfied with it.
And you got the question?
Were you satisfied with the electoral process in Iraq? There was only one? Okay. It's always Arabic, you know. Why is that not possible? Why can't we switch it to English?
No.
Okay.
Chicken 6.
Okay. Are you satisfied with the electoral process? Okay. And the second, do you have more questions? Are there more questions than just the one from your side? There's no simultaneous translation. Sorry guys, I don't know what you're doing here, but there's no simultaneous translation. Why is here no translation? Why do we pay money for people who are not capable? That's embarrassing. It's good that we're not live anymore. This one. Sorry for this.
Why didn't you answer the first
Yeah.
question?
All right. Maybe we fix the system and I answer your first question first. Sorry about this. I was really curious to hear your question. The question was, were we satisfied or happy with the electoral process? I mean, there are different fields, and we try to cover the different fields. So obviously, the technological provisions which were in place on E-Day were mainly well managed. The staff of the polling stations were educated. They knew what they're doing. Voters could make an informed choice. The campaign was calm and competitive. But nevertheless, there were restrictions in the legislation. And as I have mentioned before, we have seen, for example, that the media coverage was limited to special program, to specific program, to some private media channels. We have seen disinformation in the digital sector, which was quite striking and has not led to an inclusive campaign in the digital world or digital campaign. We regretted that, for example, also the quota for women were mainly understood and applied as if it's a maximum percentage of women represented in the parliament than a minimum representation. We have seen that parts of the society, such as the people with disability, were mainly excluded because the polling stations were not accessible for those groups of people. But if you focus only on election day and whether we have observed a major fraud or any violation, I would say no, we have not. What we have seen, what we could observe, were mainly orderly and calm. Was that the question you had?
We have here a question in the front, second row. Or yeah, Salat, you have the microphone and you answer the question.
السلام عليكم. بيسكن سلام من قضايا أستاذ يونس. في يومين كردستان وبالتحديد في محافظة أربيل كان هناك ملاحظات كثيرة وخاصة تغيير النسائج وهناك أدلة وضغوطات من قبل حزب الحاكم في أربيل. وكما ذكرت اعتقال إعلامي في أربيل ودروس. ما هو ردكم على هذه الاعتقالات وتغيير النتائج؟
If I understood your question correctly, there were two parts of the question. One is potential fraud, and the other part of the question was the intimidation of especially journalists. I hope I got this right. I hope that we will see then official complaints if there were fraud or violation. We take note of this. We have our long-term observers there. We will, of course, include this in our comprehensive analysis of the final report. If this is true, proven, we will speak to all the interlocutors, and they normally reach out to us. But so far, our observers were not given those proofs. That's at least not to my knowledge. And the second part of your question is absolutely true. The intimidation, especially in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, was striking. We have seen all kinds of harassment, depression, intimidation against independent journalists, investigative journalists. And as I've mentioned, the case of the 3 journalists ended up in a 3-year jail sentence. This is, at least for our standard, not acceptable, but we will put this also in our final report, and we will explain how to overcome this kind of dysfunction.
We have a question here on the second row.
شكرا وسامي للمكالمة الأنباء العراقية. هناك بعض الأحزاب التي شاركت في الانتخابات هددت بضرورة إعادة النظر بنتائج الانتخابات ولمحت باللجوء إلى العنف وإعادة الانتخابات. كيف ترون هذه الخطوة؟
Well, we do hope that not only on election day and the pre-election campaign, as we have seen, it was calm and quiet and peaceful. We do also hope that the post-electoral period will stay calm and quiet, because it is in the interest of the Iraqi people to have peace, quiet, and a democratic improvement in terms of the post-electoral period as well. There's no acceptance from anyone, neither here in Iraq nor from the international community, to see any kind of military-like or violence reaction towards this results. If I have emphasized and stressed before, there's no reason for any accusation from our side. We have not observed or witnesses any major fraud or violation regarding the electoral process on the election day. We can only call on everyone to stay calm and to use the legal mechanism for appeals and complaints.
We're the gentleman in black, please.
السلام عليكم أيها الشيخ مراسل قناة شرف نيوز. بعض الأحزاب والفتن السياسية الخاصة في الانتخابات اتهمت جهات أخرى أنها قامت بقراءة وتزوير الانتخابات بواسطة المفوضية. ما هو رأيكم بذلك؟ وشكرا.
It was very competitive amongst all parties, there's no question. And that was more, let's say, on the cost, on the account of the independent candidates than rather to one or the other parties. What we have seen is mainly the old parties, the blocs, were competing on an equal level playing field, while for independent and new candidates it was much more difficult to compete either money-wise or also media-wise with this amount of attendance and public funding which they could use. Regarding IHEC, as I've confirmed before, from our side, there's no indication that there was any kind of fraud or violation in terms of the results or in the pre-electoral process. I think they did everything to prevent manipulation from happening. We have talked to many interlocutors from IHEC on the national and on the government level, and what we have heard, what we have seen, we had a look around in the warehouse, for example, in Basra. We've talked to different, also domestic, national citizens observers. There were no indication that the problem lays in the hand of IHEC or that they are the reason for causing fraud or manipulation in terms of the electoral process.
Do we have more questions? Yes, gentleman in the front.
Oh, it's interesting. Nobody asked about that.
صباح الخير جميعا، مسيك سلمان وكالة الوطنية للأنوار. عذرا بالإضافة، بعد إعلان النتائج الأولية ساير أمس بدأ بعض المرشحين في أكثر من محافظة بتوجيه اتهامات صريحة للمفوضية باعتبار أنهم يتحدثون أن الأشرطة الورقية التي تزودوا بها المراقبين في مراكز الاقتراع هي تحمل أرقام لأصوات ناخبين تختلف تماما عن الارقام التي اعلنتها المفوضيه. يا ترى هل سجلتم هذه الملاحظات؟ ما هي رؤيتكم للاتهامات التي وجهت المرشحين الان في اكثر من محافظه؟ شكرا جزيلا.
You mean the polling, you mean the numbers, you mean the results? Well, I mean, we rely on the official numbers. We can only work with the official numbers of IHEC, which were announced last night at 1800. So for us, there were no contradictions, there were no differences from any other numbers. Of course, parties might have internal numbers from their domestic observer, from their party observers. From their perspective, this might differ from the official results, but if they have doubts, if they think there is a fraud to their cost, they might have the opportunity, as all the other party representatives, as all the other candidates have, to submit complaints to the appeal court, and they will deal with these cases and with these issues. This is how you normally react to those kind of accusations. But for me, this is not a reason to go violent or to do any other activities, run any other activities.
Do we have any other questions? I don't see any other questions.